Well, welcome back to the Black and Brown Get Down podcast. You are joining us for a very special bonus episode to season 3 so that we have a little time to discuss this special session that is starting on the 19th of February and to get to know a little bit more about what is changing in the political landscape here in Louisiana and specifically how it impacts us as Black and Brown people and our young people here in New Orleans. We are actually joined by our very special friend to the organization, Kristen Rome, who is the executive director of LCCR. I asked you the other day, what's the other C?
Do you remember?
Center.
Yeah.
Yes. Louisiana Center. I'm like, Louisiana Children's Rights. I'm like, what's the other C? Center. Yes. So thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we love to start off with just every conversation with what's your first memories of community and whose spirit do you bring to this work?
My first memories of community. I guess if I'm being all the way honest, it would be growing up in a Black church was my first, just my first experience of community, in that like all of the women were my aunties. You know, you gave everybody a name. It wasn't miss, it was sister, mama, auntie, whoever. And then also like having this community of cousins, like through my peers in the church.
Okay, so where was the church? You're from New Orleans, so
from
where
New
was the church?
Orleans,
Name of the church. Give us
all
the details.
You want all the details?
Yeah, take us there.
So I all the way grew up in church. Like my mama had us in church all the time. So my church was Progressive Baptist Church, which is in the Melf. It's like right in the middle of the Melf. So right now Home Depot's there. Home Depot wasn't there when we was growing up, but Home Depot's there, and it's like literally 2 blocks from Home Depot. And it was like, at least growing up, it was like really grounded in the community. And so the people at the corner store, we knew, they knew us. And I also grew up in a family where my mom was she was either a hospice nurse or she worked in like rehab facilities as a nurse, and my dad was a criminal defense attorney. And so like my parents always made sure to like surround me in regular people that were like dealing with everyday issues that everybody, that Black people dealt with, you know, substance use. And I was never made to feel like anyone was like a bad person because they were having a hard time, or anybody was the worst decision that they ever made.
Yeah.
And so it was very much instilled in me that we all family, like everybody's family. If you Black, we family. And so, yeah, church was definitely that for me. I spent most of my time there. Most of my friends were there, my aunts, my uncles, my community.
You were in children's church.
Yeah, all that. Choir, usher boy, all of that. Right now when I think about like my I'm thinking about my ancestral altar, and I'm like, at least 3 people on my altar are like aunts, uncles from church, you know, who I like just are like my people, who I don't, you know, I need them in my life. So yeah, that was my first introduction to community.
And whose spirit do you bring to the work?
Whose spirit do I bring to the work? I gotta say my grandfather, Roy Rome. So my grandfather, also born and raised in New Orleans, and just, you know, my whole life was about him working on behalf of Black people, and just really, you know, he was NAACP. I remember hearing a story about how that was like they were protesting something. I don't even remember who the governor was at the time. But, like, there was one group they, like, organized this group of protesters to go to the Capitol and protest. And then my grandfather and his homeboys was like, we going to the governor's mansion. Like, they didn't even go to the Capitol. They pulled up to the governor's mansion, like, on his steps. I don't remember who the governor was at the time. But, like, his energy was that of, like, we doing whatever we got to do for Black people by any means. And and he lived a life of service. That's what was instilled in me, that like we ain't free till we all free.
Yeah.
And so like no matter what a so-called accomplishments or accolades or, you know, whatever degrees, whatever you get, you ain't free if everybody else ain't free. And so it was very much instilled in me to serve, that service to my people was service to myself. And that's how I, you know, move my own life forward. So I bring his spirit with me.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. You know, we're going to have to bring his spirit all the way into the next few years. Yeah. We have a new governor, and so that's changing a lot of what's happening, especially thinking about this special session that's coming up. And the session is on crime.
Yes.
Right? And so what does that mean? If you give us a little insight on, like, you know, just kind of what's at stake, what's, you know, what is it about?
Yeah, so, you know, I think, you know, one thing we're up against is this terrible narrative about crime, you know, and what we know what the data shows.
Well, what is the narrative?
The narrative is that it's the wild, wild west, that like crime is happening, crime is rampant, and particularly children are committing all of this crime. And what we know, even on a national level, is that violent crime is actually on a decline. But we are up against this narrative that is telling us otherwise without the numbers or the facts to back it up. And so, you know, Jeff Landry and his people have ran with that narrative and are like, oh, you know, the crime is terrible in New Orleans. We have to address this first. And so they've created this special session, which is a time for them to focus just on crime, so that during the regular legislative session, they can focus on the other things that they, you know, purport to care about, which I think is money. And the two go hand in hand in many ways, at least how we do crime policy in Louisiana.
Which means funding the police.
Yes, funding the police. But then I think also like protecting their dollars. So, you know, as far as the regular session is concerned, all of those things are efforts to protect their dollars and make sure that the money's rolling the way it needs to roll. But this special session gives them time to not have to waste time during the regular session talking about crime, because they presented it as such a large issue for the state right now.
And tell me, how does LCCR, how do y'all work with the session? Like some of the work that y'all do in Baton Rouge?
Yeah, so we are the Juvenile Public Defender's Office for New Orleans, and we do statewide advocacy. We have clients in youth prisons throughout the state. So we advocate a lot for young people in facilities, as well as young people, or I should say prisons. I try to keep myself from saying facilities, but young people in prisons, as well as young people who are being arrested, incarcerated, and the policies that lead to it. And so as the legislative session opens, what we do is we go there and we advocate for our clients. We testify. We, you know, at different moments, we bring bills. A few years ago, we passed the Raise the Age bill, which was a huge win for Louisiana that, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about later as being potentially rolled back. But, right. You know, we are the only folks there that are specifically focused on young people in the criminal and juvenile legal systems. And so all of our advocacy in Baton Rouge at the legislature is around making sure that the policies treat Black children, because that's the reality. These are Black and brown children, they're not white children. But it's focused on making sure that the policies that we have in Louisiana treat Black and brown children fairly, and that we are addressing the root causes of any harms that young people create, because we know that healthy, happy, well-adjusted young people do not commit harms. And so any harm that a young person enacts or creates against themselves or another person is symptomatic of something else going on in that child's life. And so we try to get there and we try to have those conversations and really make Louisiana, the state, the lawmakers face what they've created. This is our creation. If the young people are out of control, it's our creation. We created it.
Means education isn't being funded, isn't
housing,
working housing.
Yeah. Housing is a huge issue. You know, I think that's one of the things that people accept really easily. Like, you know, we could just drive down the street and see like, oh, housing is a huge issue in New Orleans, and people don't think about how that impacts children and impacts teenagers, and how, like, as a teenager, you going through such a difficult time of, like, trying to figure out who you are and trying to understand your world. And many of our clients have unstable housing and are what we would say are unhoused. And so I think people think about that as, oh, if you unhoused, that means you're under the bridge. It doesn't always mean that. Sometimes it means every night you're sleeping in a different place. Yeah. And even for an adult, that has devastating impacts. But certainly for a child who's like navigating life and trying to figure out who they are, when you have no privacy, when you have no stability, and you sleeping somewhere every night, it impacts them. But yeah, to your point, we've created it through housing policies, through education policies, through food insecurity.
Can you tell us about Raise the Age and the efforts that are going on to lower it?
So a few years ago, we passed Raise the Age. We abbreviated RTA. So we passed Raise the Age. And what it did was, Louisiana was one of very few states in the country that would, if a 17-year-old was arrested, you would automatically be tried as an adult. And we know that 17-year-olds can't buy cigarettes, 17-year-olds can't vote, 17-year-olds can't enlist in the army. There are all of these things that 17-year-olds cannot do because we as a society have decided when you're 17, you're not mature enough to do these things. Yet we had these laws on the books that said if you get arrested at 17 for anything, it could be stealing deodorant from Walmart, you will be tried as an adult. And you know, for people who don't know, the difference between the adult system and the juvenile legal system is pretty significant in that whatever happens in the adult system, if you're tried as an adult, it's public information. Whereas if you're tried as a child in the juvenile system, it is sealed so that you can be rehabilitated and you can move on with your life. And you won't be penalized for the rest of your life for something you did as a child. And so we passed this legislation that raised the age up to 18. So if you were arrested as a 17-year-old, you would be tried as a child under the new Raise the Age law. And right now, there are only 4 states in the country that still try 17-year-olds as adults automatically. And Louisiana will be the first. If we roll it back, we will be the first to roll back, to lower the age. We'll be the first in the country to do it.
And that is definitely connected to what we see that's happening in our city. And especially just like the media, right? How we're allowing the media to tell stories about our young people.
Yeah, completely.
And while negating education, housing, food, transportation, all of these other issues that come to play in, you know, just the daily upbringing of the children in the city. Yeah. So, do we know if that is actually, how much do we know about what is happening at the special session? Like, that is up for...
that is up. It's a bunch of terrible
it's filed.
Things. It's up. It's up. And, you know, last year...
Do we have a number on that people can follow? Or is that something that we can post later, maybe?
What was that? Oh, so if folks follow our Instagram, we'll be posting all of these things.
What's
and
the Instagram?
Updates. LA Kids Rights.
Okay.
At LA Kids Rights. But yeah, it's been filed. That's a pretty big one that is going to be a priority for us. Because again, we'll be the first in the country to roll that back.
And how people want to move on that? Like, what should they do? What's just something that they can do to kind of, what's the call to action for them?
So definitely follow our Instagram. We'll be putting out calls to action all through the legislative session. The legislative session is tricky and also by design. It's unpredictable. And so a vote may you don't know when a vote is happening until maybe the day before. So these calls to move, like, come to Baton Rouge, we need you in Baton Rouge, or we need you to make a phone call, these things come up like pretty last minute, unfortunately, because this is how the legislative session is just built out.
And it's a part of the things that are done behind closed doors.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. All of these things happen behind closed doors, and then we'll get wind of it. We'll catch wind of it.
Part of what organizations like yours and ours is trying to do is create transparency in the process and say, no, actually, this is a public process.
Exactly.
Right? And so many times these things are decided behind closed doors, in committees, at drinks, right?
Yep.
And so...
after hours.
Right.
Yeah.
And so... we would ask people to go to Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
What else?
There will be calls to go to Baton Rouge. There will be calls to make phone calls to your legislator. There will likely be calls to send emails, and at some point calls potentially to give testimony. You know, so if folks have like experience with the juvenile legal system, you know, like folks, I know there are adults now who are able to say like, this system's, you know, like, I'm glad that my things were sealed, because now I'm able to live in the world, and like I was able to be rehabilitated and like understand the importance of keeping that system sealed so that children can move on. There will be calls for those.
That's the real part that's sort of at stake.
Yeah.
Because it's not that if this doesn't say it as it is, meaning that children won't be held accountable for harm that they create. It is literally about this privacy piece.
It's about the privacy, and children can be transferred to adult court. So this is almost like a solution looking for a problem. We don't have a law now that prevents 17-year-olds from being tried as adults. All the law says now is that if you are 17 and you are arrested, you will be automatically arrested as a child. Then the DA can decide, this is terrible, this is heinous, this is whatever, I want to transfer this child and try them as an adult. The DA can decide that. But when we take that away, for 17-year-olds, then what you end up having is you can have a 17-year-old who had a fight. You know what I'm saying? You could have a 17-year-old that stole a piece of gum, and they will be tried as an adult. And that's a problem that we don't want to create, especially when we know that if a 17-year-old commits a crime that a DA feels deserves to be tried as an adult, that can happen. We have transfer in Louisiana. They can be transferred as young as 15. Children can be transferred to adult court.
Which is also criminal.
Which is also terrible. I ain't saying that's what we condone at all, because again, these are children, and you know, I hear people say things like, well, you know, I was a child, I knew right from wrong, this, and I think what's missing is like people are not acknowledging that this is a very different world than the one that we grew up in. Like, social media has made it so that these children can't walk away from beef. You know what I'm saying? Like, if they get into an argument with somebody, is you can't leave it alone. It follows you on Instagram, TikTok, and all of these things. Snapchat, you know? And so they can't leave it. And then I think the other big thing that we are seeing, particularly in New Orleans, is we are seeing, or all over the country, we're seeing the impact of the pandemic and what it did to young people, what it did to their mental health, how it just completely stripped their community. We felt it as adults. You know, we still reeling. I still, you know, feel like sometimes like, damn, it's just all of a sudden we're thrown back into everything.
At this point now, it's compounding.
Yeah. And there are few to little mental health resources for young people in our state. And so we see at LCCR, we see our clients struggling very much with mental health support.
Yeah. You know, a lot of the folks that are members of our organization are either in education or them themselves have children and are like some of them might be resource people, but cannot find resources, mental health services, really, really difficult to find in this state. What do you say to your clients? What do you say to other parents or educators who are trying to connect in that way?
It's tough. Honestly, it's tough because the resources just don't exist, and there's so much red tape and bureaucracy when trying to get to the resources. But what I always tell people who have young people in a school is that you should be talking to the school about your needs. You should be talking to the school social worker or the principal or whoever about your needs. But I think beyond that, what I really understand we need is like community. More like, you know, the membership or OVMV and being able to come to one another and be like, this is what I need, and being able to say, oh, my homegirl, call her, and making connections this way, because waiting on these institutions to serve us, the village is where it's at. Like, you know, how we started the conversation, this sense of community, like having community, and being able to go to community and be like, I need this, and then community presenting it to you and coming through for you is what we need more of, because these institutions have not served us and they continue to not serve us.
Yeah. And the way that, we talked about social media, or sort of the presence of just online, everything is just, in that same way. I always try to tell folks, you can also get mental health services online. And so in that sense, like, the person doesn't have to be here. Now, that sometimes can be a little challenging, because New Orleans is a very, very specific place. You would not understand. But, maybe there are other ways to connect. But I always try and kind of give that out as a resource as well. There's a transparency database bill that's coming up. Can you tell us a little more about that?
So that's another one that, like, really goes to confidentiality. So again, the youth system is about confidentiality. It's about protecting young people. Not because we don't want to hold them accountable, but because we understand that the child's brain is still developing. The adolescent brain is still developing, and it develops for a normal, healthy brain, well into mid-20s. And so the youth system in Louisiana is specifically about rehabilitation. You cannot put a child in prison in Louisiana, in the juvenile legal system, but to rehabilitate them. And so this is sealed so that when the child is rehabilitated and comes out, they can move on with their lives. Last year, Representative Debbie Villio, who is a close ally of Jeff Landry, proposed this bill where she's going to propose it again this year. She's already proposed it. But we're calling it the anti-confidentiality bill. But basically, where these children's arrest records, so at the time of arrest, all of these things about them in their court records become public information. And so this is just an arrested child. It's not a convicted child. It's not a child who we know has done something. This is just a child that has been suspected of doing something, and all of their information will become public. And what's really frustrating is that there's a couple things that's frustrating. When Debbie Villio, this was pretty much Jeff Landry's, like, kickoff to his campaign last year when this was proposed, and was, two things are really frustrating. One, that Debbie Villio is a representative from Jefferson Parish, and when she proposed this bill, she did not propose this bill for this database to live in Jefferson Parish. She didn't even want the database in Jefferson Parish. She wanted it in Orleans,
of course,
and EBR in the black areas, and so that's very frustrating. The other very frustrating thing is that, like, her reason for the bill, she said this bill was needed because DAs are not giving victims information about their cases. And so victims don't know when these cases are going forward in court, and they don't know what's happening in court. DAs have an obligation to do that. And so if DAs aren't doing their job, if elected DAs aren't doing their job, we should be passing laws to hold elected DAs accountable, not passing laws to penalize children because adults aren't doing their job. But we see that happen quite often in Louisiana, that adults aren't held accountable, but then we are asked to hold children accountable. Yeah.
So we have these two bills that are coming up. Raise the age, trying to get rolled back.
They're trying to lower the age, and then this anti-confidentiality bill. And there are several others. Which is being
called something around truth and transparency.
And several others, but those are the biggest ones that we see being an issue.
And the impact of all of it is basically like, you can make a mistake, right?
Yeah.
And you can get arrested, or you're actually in prison as a young person. And instead of you being able to get rehabilitated, I'm hearing, and actually say, okay, cool, I'm now at a place where I'm going to be living my new life, not my old life.
No.
That old life is going to follow you, because not only is all of your privacy gone, but the data is out there.
Yep.
And that is harmful. Why? For all the reasons I just said. But sometimes we got to spell it out, because people are like, people should know. And I'm like,
no.
We are robbing children of an opportunity to start anew.
There was an article a few years ago that came out about he was like a higher up, a president, a CEO or something of Jordan brand, I want to say. Either Jordan brand or Nike. And he ended up like coming out and being like, I actually committed a terrible crime when I was a child and I did time. And he was speaking to the fact that were it not for the fact that he was able to change his life and no one was able to go back and see what he had done, he would have never been able to add all that he brought to the world. And so, you know, we limit our ability to benefit from children and their beauty and their brilliance and what they can bring to our communities. When we stop at 15, 16, 17, 14 and say, oh, you made a mistake. Yeah. Oh, you did something terrible. You did something we didn't like. We don't care why. We don't care what led to it. We just no longer want you in society. And in particular, the thing that, you know, it keeps them from jobs. I want to answer your question. It keeps them from jobs. It keeps them from housing. It keeps them from the ability to get education, to network in the ways that they need to network. But, you know, I think for anyone who cares about incarceration, I think a lot of people will say, like, you know, it's cute and fun to say, like, oh, it's too many people in prison. And, like, there's this big influx of people in prison, mass incarceration. But when you think about mass incarceration, the people who are in prison, there are two ends of that. And that's the juvenile legal system, and that's the death penalty. And unless and until we address those two ends of that spectrum, we can never shrink the prison population. As long as we are letting these people take our children and lock our children up, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, and lock our children up, we will never decrease the system. I think about it like a faucet. We can take as many people out of the prison as we want to. Through parole or other things like this, as many adults as we want to, but until we cut the faucet off and figure out a better way to support our children and their needs so that they don't end up having to go to prison, we are never going to decrease the amount of people in prison. And this is very specifically, clearly, this is the most black and brown issue. You know, this is one of it goes up there with crimmigration. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is our issue. These are our children, and these are our communities. This is our future. As long as we locking up children, this is the future of our world.
Right. And we know that we're creating just those pathways. So that they stay incarcerated.
Yes.
So that recidivism rates, we know if you go in, you're likely to go back, right? And I think, you know, people don't understand also just how much business is around prisons, right?
Yeah.
So you really gotta have buildings, you gotta have the beds, you gotta
have uniforms, you gotta have food,
you gotta have COs, you gotta have all of that is money.
It is a billion-dollar industry. It is a huge industry. You have to have someone everything that a person in prison needs has to be purchased from a corporation. You know, there's the phone calls cost so much money. You know what I'm saying?
And I think we don't understand grace, forgiveness, rehabilitation, restoration for ourselves in our own families, in our own relationships, and that's why we can't extend it to young people or to people who have committed real harm against other people.
We don't have it. And it really, unless and until we figure out what causes it, what is happening, why did this person do this, we're not stopping it. We're not creating safety by incarcerating more people. I've been in New Orleans. I'm born and raised in New Orleans. For as long as I can remember, we have been the incarceration capital of the world. And so as the incarceration capital of the world, we know if locking people up works, we should also be the safest place in the world.
And we're not.
And
safe.
We're not safe. And so I think if we really care about safety, if we want to be safe in our communities, then we really have to figure out a better way to create safety, because this is not it. This ain't it.
I would say, so for sure, everyone please go to LA Kids Rights.
LA Kids Rights.
Yes. Is that a
That's our
.org?
Instagram.
Oh, okay.
That's our website, www.lakidsrights.org. Our Instagram is at lakidsrights. We're on Facebook as well, and Twitter.
Okay,
Yeah.
I love it. So yeah, please go there to stay informed. Also, we have a new members meeting, February 22nd. You're welcome to come, because this is stuff. These are the main things that sort of issues that we work on are education and criminal legal system issues, and so we are happy to partner with you all and to say whenever we need to put the call to action, we are following your lead.
Yes, we will be calling on y'all.
We are following your lead, and so that we can try and get some people out there. And I think just in general, having more conversation about this.
Yeah.
People are afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
Because of all the reasons. And we actually do need to inform, and part of changing the narrative is giving folks an opportunity to hear other narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say at LCCR, we want solutions. You know what I'm saying? Like I always say to people, it's like, I live here too. You know what I'm saying? I live in New Orleans. I'm raising a child in New Orleans. I want to feel safe in my community too. And so community safety is important to me. Accountability is important to me. But we need to figure out what that looks like instead of just letting people tell us what we need to make our community safe when we know that those things don't work. Incarceration has done nothing for Black and brown people except tear us apart, tear up our families, take away our parents, our aunts, our uncles, our children. And at some point, we got to be willing to say, we don't subscribe to this. We don't condone this. This is not what we want, and do something different.
Anything that you want to leave us with?
I just appreciate y'all. I appreciate y'all so much for caring about young people. We are at a very tough time in our city and in our state and our country as it relates to Black and brown children. And so many people just don't care. So many people look at young people these days and don't care what they need, and it's heartbreaking. And as an auntie, as a mom, as a sister, as a cousin, I am concerned about the future of our world when we don't care about our children. So I just appreciate y'all caring and trying to get this out here, and we just gonna keep fighting.
We're gonna keep pushing. We're gonna keep bringing Baba's spirit up in here.
That's right. Baba Rome.
Thank you all for listening. We are coming back with Senator Royce Duplessis and our good friend from ISLA, Homero López. We have a returning guest. Hey, we have Homero López here with us from ISLA. We'll get talking about ISLA in a second. But you were with us on season 1.
I was.
Come on, we didn't even have a set then. We were it was during the pandemic, during the panty, and
So we're going
and that is definitely what we've always called it. Yeah, we didn't have a set. I think it was just Zoom. And so thank you for joining us now on our set at the corner store.
Fanciness going on now at the corner store.
It's so cute. We got produce and all the things. Homero López. We love to always ask folks, what's your earliest memories of community and whose spirit do you bring to the work?
Yeah, that's not deep at all. Earliest memory of community is my mom, or we all were migrant workers, and so we moved around the Midwest a lot. We lived in these migrant communities where you would live on these trailer houses near the farm, and they pick you up in the morning, they take you, and it was that community of everybody helping. When people say it takes a village, that was a village, right? It was, my mom needed someone to take care of the kids because she needed to go do something. The neighbor was doing it. And it was this built family that you had where there's a bunch of folks that, I call cousins who weren't cousins, right? And that's how I remember them. That's how I grew up with them. And so that type of to me, that's the first moment of community for me, is living in this space where everybody's doing what they can to make it through, and everyone's helping the other ones, and like celebrating everybody's achievements. Everybody, is there for. Like,
so shout out to migrant workers. I don't think people, when they hear that, they understand actually what that means. Migrant workers are responsible for
getting your food on the table, getting the food out, right?
So when
literally
for those
picking
people
it.
who say grace and pray before, thank you God for the hands who prepared this, and they should also hopefully be saying thank you for the hands that took
literally got the food,
took the potato out the ground.
Yeah.
For those, I think potato grows in the ground. Yeah, potato grows in the ground. And so,
potatoes do grow in the ground.
Yeah, and so migrant workers are responsible for, like, literally our food.
Yes, picking the food, getting it, and it's literally backbreaking work. Like, I was a kid when I did it, so for me, it was fun, right? I was running around. It wasn't a big thing, but looking back on it, the adults doing it year in, year out, season. Doesn't matter if it's raining, if it's snowing, living in the Midwest, I hate the cold. There's a reason I stay south of the Mason-Dixon line, right? It's not the racism. But it's bad up there. But people do it. They're there day in, day out, right? There's no real weekend. You're working with the season, you're working with what the produce is available. And it's intense work. Yeah,
honor and respect to you, your family, all migrant workers. Whose spirit do you bring to this work?
I generally say my mom, right? She's this
What's my lady's name?
Enriqueta.
Doña Enriqueta.
Doña Queta.
Doña Queta. Ooh, come on, Doña Queta. Let's go.
Yeah. She's, super energetic, just outgoing lady who has tons of bravery and just courage, right? She moved from South Texas with 4 kids, went to the Midwest without really knowing anybody, started working in the fields, getting the kids in there, bringing her brothers. Like, she brought the brothers instead of typically, right, the men go and then the women go and join. She's
brought
the one that
the
went.
Brothers means, because see, the people, we got to unpack this a little bit.
I got them to come up and start working in the Midwest as well, doing that work.
Which means having a stable enough space, home,
connection to people who are doing the work.
So she was the person who created the portal and stretched it out enough so that her
brought
family
up the
could.
family.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man.
Yeah. So she's and then she recently moved away, unfortunately. But she did come down here for 5 years. She lived with us here for 5 years while helping raise our 2 daughters, which was, again, you need a village when you have those kids. Yeah. And so it was incredibly helpful to have her around helping us out.
Well,
with that.
thank you, Doña Queta, for all the things,
Yeah, for sure.
including creating this very how did you describe your mom just now?
Incredibly energetic.
Oh, energetic.
Courageous.
Okay. Yep. And so you have those same qualities. You are energetic and you are courageous, because when I think about the work that you do and how you do the work with such grace, it's like people need to know, what do you do? What does ISLA do?
Yeah. So primarily our primary focus and work is representing detained immigrants throughout Louisiana. So in Louisiana in 2018, we had this massive explosion of immigration detention. And
which is interesting that it followed 2017's reforms.
I mean, it's connected to those reforms, right? So we had wonderful reforms in 2017.
When we're talking about our state carceral systems.
Correct.
Here in Louisiana.
Right. And so some of those jails then end up closing down. And at the same time...
And these jails are in smaller parishes, rural parishes.
Places like Winfield, Louisiana, Jonesboro, Louisiana, Basio, Louisiana, right? These very rural, isolated areas in central Louisiana where that carceral system is, to an extent, the economic engine of those areas, right? It's the best job you have. And again, coming as a migrant worker in the Midwest, I saw those factory towns. I saw those migrant jobs available where that's what you do. You graduate high school or you drop out of high school and you go and you work there because it pays well and it's the job that's available. And so that's what you end up doing. And so after 2017, after these reforms happened, people got released. At the same time, you've got Trump taking over nationally, wanting to arrest and detain more immigrants.
Yeah.
Louisiana, you've got the infrastructure set up. They will pay you double what the state was paying you, so those parishes jumped at the opportunity.
Yep.
Right? And so when we have these conversations about making reform, yes, let's definitely, and what was done in 2017 was great. And at the same time, we need to still think more connectively, right? This part that happened then with the immigration side, part of that comes with we don't have other opportunities necessarily for folks in those rural areas.
Yeah.
And so it's not just what are we trying to shut down, but what are we trying to build up afterwards that we need to be thinking about.
Yeah. And so what does ISLA do?
Oh, yeah. So back to that point. We therefore provide legal representation to the people that are detained. So people that are in immigration detention centers throughout Louisiana, we will provide you legal representation. Because in immigration court, unlike in criminal court, you're not entitled to an attorney. You have the right to an attorney, but if you cannot afford one will most definitely not be provided for you.
Yeah.
So you end up representing yourself. When we started ISLA in 2018, the representation rate in detention was about 13%. And so those representation rates, right, people just aren't getting attorneys. And the system is so structured against people fighting their cases that it's basically a warehouse. It's a processing center where people don't win and don't even have a shot at trying to win. And so what we do is we go in, we can't represent everybody, unfortunately. We don't have the capacity or the amount of staff necessary, but we represent as many people as we can, provide them direct representation to fight their case. And as long as they're willing to continue fighting, we'll continue fighting for them.
Yeah. And you're usually the person who is doing the fighting.
I mean, I've got a wonderful staff, right?
Well, all that to say that
staff.
when I think about you, I imagine you on the road, like, let me drive hours and hours. It's about, like, what's the closest or even furthest point that you're driving to go do representation work?
The closest one for New Orleans is about 3 hours away. It's in Basio, Louisiana.
What a commute.
Yeah, and that's each way, right? So a 6-hour drive if you're going there and back. The furthest one is up in Richwood, which is about a 5-hour drive in each direction.
Wow.
Like near Monroe, basically.
Wow. Thank you so much for your work. Not to dip too much into this, but people are constantly like, okay, well, this is a problem because immigrants are here. Why are immigrants here? And not to get too, deep into my bag into why immigrants are here, but I like to invite people to go stand in front of 327 St. Charles, which is the home of the United Fruit Company, sort of old corporate office, which is where the wealth of all of the extraction of our lands and the wealth of our lands came, right? Which meant all of the banana republics, basically fueled the food source in this country.
New Orleans has, I think it's back to it, but Katrina was there, I think it's back to that point, has the largest Honduran population outside of Honduras. And that's because of the United Fruit Company.
Yep.
Right? Bringing in workers, and then people follow where their families are, right? That's how migration patterns work. And so if you would bring in workers, eventually they would bring their families and the migration happened. And so now when you see, for example, children, unaccompanied children who get released, New Orleans is in the list of cities with places like New York, Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and you're like, population-wise, New Orleans doesn't fit there, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a tiny city, but because so many of the kids are coming from Honduras, they're being reunited with family members here.
And just to hit a quick drop down, there was 20,000, at least 20,000 in Honduras hectares, right, which is bigger than acres, right? Land that was taken, stolen, political puppeteering that was happening in Honduras, so that Sam the Banana Man could take over this land in Honduras, which was likely our people's land and indigenous people's land, and they went from owning it to just working it. It gives me sharecropper, right? And so then it's like you're now working the land and only taking a portion of that. And now there's like a big mansion that Sam the Banana Man owned. That's where like Tulane University's president are, they own it. It's their asset. They're allowed to live in it. And so when you ask me why are immigrants here, I'm like, because that's my let me not get too spirited because the ancestors start working, but that's why we're here, because our money is here. So come up off our money so that we could get on with our lives, right? But anyway.
And all of those actions, right, the United Fruit Company, that was all backed by the U.S. government, right?
Correct.
Military backing was there, whether it was out front or implicitly, like, don't you dare, because they're coming in.
Yep. And so the planning of, and this is well documented, the planning of political coups that are happening in countries throughout that time and in that region were actually planned here in New Orleans, right? And so anyway, tap in with us as an organization if you'd love to find out more. Okay, so we have a new governor. The new governor has put out an executive order. Yeah, you about to explain it. And so,
haven't heard about this yet. Weird.
So what is this executive order, and like who does it impact?
So it is specifically, the executive order he put out is specifically directed at the executive agencies in the state, right? So the agencies that fall within the office of the governor. And what he's trying to do, so a little bit of real quick history. Last February, actually, a little more than a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, we at ISLA got hit with a subpoena by then Attorney General Landry.
Who is now the governor.
Who asking us to give him confidential identifying information of our clients who are seeking asylum. And why he wanted that information is because he was suing the Biden administration for some changes in immigration law that the Biden administration is trying to implement. And the entire argument that he has going is immigrants create a financial drain on the state of Louisiana, and therefore we as a state are being harmed, and we can therefore sue the federal government. That didn't work out for him in court, right? It got kicked out. Eventually he withdrew the subpoena, or his office withdrew the subpoena. Now that he's governor, he's planning to bring more of these lawsuits, most likely, against the Biden administration if there are any changes in immigration law. And in order for him to make those arguments of we as Louisiana can bring this lawsuit, we have to show that we're harmed.
Yeah.
And that harm that he's trying to show is financial harm, saying that immigrants drain financial resources from the state.
Yeah.
And so what he has done is ordered his executive agencies to collect data to show how much it costs the state to provide services to immigrants, specifically undocumented immigrants is what he's focusing on, and how much it costs them, and to implement policies to be able to collect that data if they can't currently collect that data. And so it doesn't affect people individually, like you're not identifying people individually, but there's also a side effect of it creating fear, right? And that's part of what this is trying to create fear amongst the community and trying to create hate amongst communities that are outside of the immigrant community towards the immigrant community. One of the sections specifically, people are referencing it as the name and shame section, which is, it's asking the police or the state police, the chief of the state police, to periodically publish names and information about immigrants who have undocumented immigrants who have committed crimes. And so they're trying to get that information out, again, trying to blame crime, right?
Yeah.
The special session that's coming up about crime, you're trying to say all this crime that's happening in Louisiana is associated with immigrants. And so you're trying to create, one, fear amongst the community itself, and then two, this scapegoating hatred coming from not within the community, but towards that community.
Yeah. At Our Voice Nuestra Voz, we do the work of nation building between Black and brown people. We create solidarity between Black and brown people because much of what we see in the hate and political, like the policies and the political strategies used to oppress us are very similar, right? We just talked about, the what might feel or seem like the equivalent of sharecropping in Central America and here in South Louisiana, right? And then now you're talking about the publishing of names of people who have committed crimes. We have seen that before in this state, and we have seen it as it relates to Black people. And we're talking about the criminalization of Black and brown people.
Yeah, for sure. That's in immigration, right? What we started talking about earlier. You shut down you shut down these jails, and then you fill them in with immigrants. There's this cyclical aspect to it where you're targeting particular populations.
Yeah.
We can do better than locking people up.
Yeah.
Right? We can provide jobs and opportunities that are not locking people up.
Yeah.
But we
And
don't.
the connection between that and like our bodies, capitalism, and like making money off of our bodies, whether we're harvesting food or whether you're locking up our bodies, right? It's all about our beings are seen as the equivalent of a product or something that you can make money off of.
Yeah.
So why is it dangerous? I know you talked about the data a little bit, but why is it dangerous for this data to be collected in this way?
Collecting the data, and it's to us the reason it's dangerous, the reason it's problematic is because it creates the situation of creating a scapegoat. It's blaming folks for things that aren't necessarily a particular group's fault, but it's creating that scapegoat. It's allowing hatred to go towards a particular group based off of isolating a particular section of it, right? When he's doing the financial analysis, he's not talking about how much money is brought in by people who are working in construction and building up the city and rebuilding after natural disasters and what value that comes to the state. Yeah. That part's not being analyzed. It's not a full financial analysis. It's just what services are you receiving, therefore it's on you.
Yeah.
Right? And so you're draining the state of these resources. And so what ends up happening is this one-sided look at it is very much focused on collecting and publishing data that says that immigrants are harmful
and
to the
moving
state.
a narrative that benefits
It's about
their
setting
agenda.
it's about setting this narrative that now you've got people outside of the community blaming that community as the reason for whatever the problem is.
Yeah. What can people do? And I'm talking about, I want you to go a little deep. What can people do beyond joining organizations, beyond, really getting informed? Like, what should people be doing?
So I think there's different layers of what should people be, what people should be doing, what kinds of things. Folks that are from within immigrant communities or deal with them on a regular basis, it's exercising your rights, right? A lot of this information that's being collected, the only way it gets collected is if you yourself disclose it. A police officer pulls me over, I don't have to give him any immigration information.
Say that.
There's no requirement that I provide him or them, the police officer, with my immigration status. There's not. I have to give him my name. I have to give him ID if I'm driving, right? I have to give him my driver's license. But Otherwise, I don't have to give you any information regarding my immigration status. You have no jurisdiction over that. So, but folk, they'll ask. If you respond, it's the same thing as they come and knock on your door. They say, "Can I come in? Do you have a warrant?" No.
And we're very, very used to disclosing all the things to anyone who is in power, to anyone who is wearing a badge, who is in uniform. And so part of that is like we have to start to really think about these relationships that are based on hierarchy and really find ways to like, nope, I don't have to. This is we can redefine those relationships.
Right. And so I think in general, right, specifically immigrant communities, exercise your rights, right? You have rights, exercise those rights. Go to know your rights presentations, learn what those rights are, and exercise them. And that goes across the board, everybody, right? Generally, I'm an attorney, that's my thought process, right? Exercise your rights. For those that are not necessarily in the community, right, folks that find themselves allied to immigrants and find themselves in a way of wanting to help in that regard, exercise your privilege, right? If you've got connections with legislators, you've got connections with the governor's office somehow, bring it up. Have those conversations.
Yeah.
Have those conversations with your conservative buddies who have their ideals and you generally are like, nah, I just don't want to fight right now. Engage in that. Question the why.
I am.
Question the why. Why do you think this way, right? What do you think the problem is? And how is doing X, Y, or Z going to solve that problem? Yeah. I think we've gotten into a situation where we get ourselves so much into bubbles and surrounded by echo chambers and people who agree with us on a regular basis that we never really speak out and reach out to that other side. Yeah. And so I think there needs to be a lot of more of that in general across society of engaging. Because once you sit people down and they start chatting, it's like, oh, we don't, right? It's what you're doing here at Nuestra Voz with, there's been this historical divide between black and brown folks. And once you get them together in a room and they start chatting, breaking bread at the black and brown get down, right? When that kind of stuff happens.
Come on, he knows the organization.
It's like, this is cool. You're cool. And it's like, yeah, the only reason you didn't is because there's been the only reason you thought I wasn't was because there's been this narrative that we've been sold and been bought into over time.
Yeah. And, once we start really, like, one of the things I'm doing is just, like, learning the history, learning the story of the land, learning the story of the people, right? And when I go and, love sugarcane, love it as a crop, as what it means, what it stands for, and, like, the history of sugar in South Louisiana and, like, what that meant for, for this country and beyond. But you go to a sugarcane plantation, and by plantation I mean like active, it's not of the past. When you go to these places, well, what was the quarter for enslaved peoples? You know who lives in those houses now? Yeah, they look a lot like you, like me, right? And when you look at the data from the school districts in these parishes, it's like, oh yeah, these are the kids who are learning English. And so there's such a there's no reason for us to continue to move that divide. But actually, we need to engage in our stories. And, as we get to know each other's stories, we're like, oh, yeah, this is the same thing, but it looks like this, Yeah. And so people definitely need to engage across differences and or perceived differences, right? What else should folks do?
I think you covered it with getting more acquainted with the history, right? Because people will say, people look at it and they're like, when we talk about things like the after effects of slavery and whatnot, people are like, but, since that was in the 1860s, it's like, nah, there was a whole another century there where there was Jim Crow in place. And so what you brought up earlier about Sam the Banana Man, right? The effects in Honduras and in Central America more broadly from that type of American exploitation, yeah, people are going to come here, right? You've got places named San Diego, Santa Fe, San Francisco, right? Colorado means something in Spanish, right? People are coming to areas that their families used to be. If you go around from South Texas, if you go along the border in South Texas, there's Laredo and Nuevo Laredo. There's, Progreso and Nuevo Progreso. It used to be one town, and then it became an international border. Like, it used to be a town that had a river, and now it's an international border. And so those histories, that information matters for context of why things are happening now.
Yeah.
Right? It takes generations oftentimes for things to take effect, but you start to see those effects down the road. And if you're not connected to that and you're not aware of that information, then it's going to be really difficult for you to see that larger picture.
Yep. If people want to donate to ISLA, where should they go?
ISLAimmigration.org.
Okay.
That's our site, and you can donate there.
Okay. ISLA, ISLA.
ISLA, immigration.org.
Yeah. And if you want to become a member of our Voice Nuestra Voz and do the work of building solidarity, of learning, of engaging in different strategies, whether it's like the political work, right, or the cultural work, or moving campaigns. We have a membership meeting, a new members meeting, February 22nd at 6 p.m. here at 900 Camp Street. Also on March 6th, you will be joining us with community for an explanation of this executive order, and for us to talk about specifically what community can do, and as people who in all areas, right? Folks who are undocumented, or for folks who aren't, but also need to engage in similar ways, not disclosing, information that doesn't belong to state agencies or local agencies, right? And as well as creating other community safety measures so that we're able to help keep each other safe, especially, and start to engage in that practice over the next couple of years as we enter this new administration.
Yeah, I think this is the start of it. We're probably going to see a lot more orders, legislation coming down, and we got to be aware, paying attention.
So if you have money, donate it. That's how you can get involved. If you need information, come to a membership meeting, because I promise you will get the information. If you need to be in relationship with other people who are engaged deeply in this process, like, come to a membership meeting, come to the March 6th meeting. There are things for us to do as a community that we need each other. And the time for us to be involved in this practice and to move each other to action is now. And so we are very, very grateful for you. We ask that, not to get off into my prayer bag, but, continued blessings and protection as you're up and down those roads, as well as for all of your team. Thank you, Homero.
Thank you.
All right, well, welcome back to the Black and Brown Get Down podcast, everyone. We are filming a very special bonus episode, and we have the good Senator Royce Duplessis here with us today. Oh, is it tonight? It's not tonight. It's today. So it just feels a little moodier in here. How are you, Senator?
I'm doing lovely. I'm doing great. Excited to be here with my friend.
Yes.
Great to be on set,
Come on, at the corner store. I see you got your J's on. Someone give him a shoe cam.
Like I said, I couldn't do the loafers today.
Right.
I was coming to the corner store.
Right.
So I had to switch it up a little bit.
Shout out to Intrinsic Trinity for building our set. She just did, some really amazing work for, was that the M-Line ball, the Cash Money pendant?
That was beautiful.
Yeah, we love to support the young people, their businesses, homegrown.
Yes.
Okay, so we are here doing this bonus episode because a lot has changed since we finished season 3, mostly, helping people understand the new political landscape and getting them to understand parts of, kind of what might happen during this special session and how they could get involved. Sure. And so, but first, I want to just give you an opportunity. One of the things that we ask here at the podcast usually is, what are your earliest memories of community, and whose spirit do you bring to your work?
So my earliest memories of community, for me, go back to my days on the playground. Grew up here in New Orleans, played at Pontchartrain Park, so I'm a product of the New Orleans Recreation Department. And me and all my brothers, when we were about 5 years old, I have 3 brothers, we got put on the playground. We just basically got dropped off there, and it was really community for us, right? So some of the same kids we went to school with, we played on the playground with, and if you're not practicing that night or after practice, you go to the candy lady or to the corner store, get a Huckabuck, get some, Fritos and cheese, whatever it is you're trying to do. And that was like our experience growing up. But again, it showed us at a very, very early stage the importance of stability and just being involved in positive activities and what that means to a community. Yeah. And
you were a part of this larger community.
For sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about
and in terms of what spirit I bring to this work, I would certainly think my grandparents.
Say their names. We love to call the ancestors,
Oh, absolutely. So Wilfred and Edna Duplessis, that's my dad's parents. My father, my grandfather, he was an educator. He spent his whole career teaching at all these parish public schools. My grandmother, she ran a daycare center. And then now in Dardanella, Hamilton, my mother's parents, my grandmother, she was like,
shout out to the grandmas who are everything.
She did it all. She cooked, she sewed, entrepreneur, she did it all. They owned a corner store. They sold
Come on, when the corner stores were black owned.
That's right. Yeah. And my grandfather, he was a porter, worked his way up through the union, and raised 8 kids, etc.
Wow.
So, that's the spirit I bring to this.
Man, deep roots. Yeah. That is beautiful. I don't think that I appreciated all of that. Thank you for sharing. So many things have changed over the years, certainly, but even over the last few months. And so we want to really give people an understanding of what has changed in the political landscape. But maybe even before that, let's talk about redistricting.
Sure.
So huge win.
Yeah, major.
Major. Can you tell us what was your role and really what was at stake and what has been won?
Sure. So I'll try to give you the short version. So serving in the state legislature, which I have been serving now in the Louisiana legislature since 2018, I was first elected to the House of Representatives. In every state throughout this country, the state legislature's responsibility is to redraw congressional maps every 10 years after the census. So every state has to go through redistricting, do reapportionment based on population shifts, population trends in every state. This is something we have to do by law. So as we went into the 2020 census, after we completed that, and after that last election, I was appointed to the committee as vice chair for the committee that was going to be leading up redistricting.
Huge.
So as vice chair in a Republican-dominated legislature, I was the lead for the Democrats and for the Black Caucus on the House side. So I was very intimately involved in the process. And this was important because this was the first time in this country that since the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, where states were going to be doing redistricting without the protection of the Department of Justice. And without getting into too much of the weeds, there was this thing called pre-clearance before the 2013 Shelby case, where if a state made changes to congressional maps that were potentially harmful, states with racist histories, like Louisiana, they would have to first get it pre-cleared by the Department of Justice. Well, that protection had been done away with in 2013, so that we were going into this without that protection. So fast forward, this was going back to 2020, or the community organizing was going on to try to get people to complete the census. We know that 33% of this state is African American. Out of 6 congressional districts, though, only one of those seats is representative of the black community. So we went into this knowing we were going to be fighting for a second black congressional seat. And we knew it would be a challenge. We knew that there would be litigation. I will tell you, what we did not expect was for the U.S. Supreme Court to rule the way it did in the Alabama case, which was similarly situated, except their population is 27% African American.
And how did, for those who don't know, how did the did they rule?
So when this went up on appeal through all of the different litigation, the U.S. Supreme Court basically said to Alabama, you all need to draw a second black majority district. And that gave us the indication that they were going to rule the same way here in Louisiana.
So there was precedent.
There was that precedent. So whole lot of litigation, up to almost 3 years of fighting, and ultimately with this new governor, which we can talk about that shift. But I just want to remind everyone who's now paying attention that all of the fighting was going on before this new governor, right? So the climate has always been hostile, right? But this new governor actually came in and said, we're not going to fight anymore. We're going to come together around a map that actually has 2 majority black districts, and that's what we did. So huge win for our state, huge win for black people in our state, and a huge win for democracy, because the redistricting process, in my opinion, is the bedrock of democracy, because that's when you're drawing maps that should be representative of the communities. And
versus the gerrymandering.
Correct. You should not gerrymandering to fit the interests of those in office, but to make districts that are truly reflective of our communities. So it was a very eye-opening experience. It was a very difficult experience, but it was one that I was proud to be a part of, and it's going to continue. You know, it's not over yet. We have to keep going. There's going to be an election this fall for that second seat. We'll see what happens there, but it was a huge win for the people of Louisiana.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's deep, just on a number of different levels, right? But it sounds like people need to make sure that they're doing all the things, not just voting, but filling out their census.
I've always been a believer in participation. Going back to the question around being raised on the playground, but voting is just the first step. Right? Because if you don't vote, you forego your voice. And if you choose not to participate, then you're choosing not to basically take yourself out and take your voice out. And like I said, this is the bedrock. This redistricting process is really the bedrock of democracy for me, because it's all about representation. One man, one vote, one woman, one vote. It's all about giving people fair representation. So, but just voting is the first step. You have to vote and then hold elected officials accountable, be active, be engaged, and then we can start to see a change in the process.
Yeah. So many people are disillusioned by just the democratic process, even thinking about the last election, and just turnout and what they actually see as parties not being representative of like their interest, or not doing a great job with turnout. How would you encourage, or like what would you say to those folks?
I would say first of all, I acknowledge the frustration, and I share it. I share it not just as an elected official, but as a citizen. As someone who wants to see change. So I share in that frustration, number one. But number two is, now that we recognize that there is just unbelievable levels of disenchantment and disengagement from people who just feel like the process is failing them and they would rather not participate, that we have to push back on that, and we have to honor ourselves enough to say we are not going to quit. We're going to keep going, no matter how difficult it is, that we're going to show up. And that's the only way. And look, we as elected officials need to do a better job of delivering. We need to do a better job of showing that government can work, to give people a reason to believe so that they are encouraged. But we also, as voters, can't feel like we have to always fall in love with our leaders either, right? And that's the other thing. We can't
say that last part.
We can't over romanticize elected officials and government as though like it's kind of taken on like this sort of pop culture image of like, look, elected officials are very imperfect, right?
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be idolized.
Put them on that pedestal, they're going to fall right off.
Every time. No, they're going to fall every time. We saw what happened with Obama in 2008. And now folks are like, this guy, first black president. But they're people. They're not infallible, right?
Yeah.
So we should not hold them on a pedestal, right? And
even though they, Obama might be framed.
He's
on the wall right next to the Jesus in the dining room. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we should not over romanticize.
Yeah, we create deities.
Correct. And that will only lead to us being let down.
Yeah.
But we just have to see them as an extension of us, as an extension of the community, as an extension of our interests.
Yeah, and have that relationship where it's based on accountability.
Absolutely.
And it's based on like communication, investment.
Right. That's right.
And all the things so that you can.
I also think in today's world, there's just a high level of disinformation and misinformation too, that has also led to people not engaging. And I think that's been intentional by opposing forces. Yeah. Where in
because if it's not in the TikTok, I ain't seen it.
Or it's not true. It's a 60-second TikTok can, in my opinion, try to simplify something that's not that simple.
Yeah.
To engage in the process, you have to acknowledge that there's a lot of nuance, right? And everything can't be broken down to a 60-second reel or a 30-second reel or some video on TikTok. And I think that has also led to a lot of the disengagement that voters feel. It's just a lot of information that's out there, and a lot of it's not correct information.
Yeah.
So combating that is a challenge.
So we have a new governor.
Yeah.
And black and brown people are foreseeing like, man, we're gonna have a really tough at least 4 years, right, if not longer, and furthermore, the kind of impact of that will be felt long after this governor is in office, and so thinking about black and brown people and thinking about just kind of vulnerable populations in the state, who would you say should be paying attention to what's happening? And specifically, could you tell us more about this special session?
Sure. So look, everyone should be paying attention, especially vulnerable communities, especially communities of color, black and brown people throughout this state should be organizing. We should be coming together, trying to do a little bit less fighting amongst ourselves. Mm-hmm. We should be trying to find ways to unify around issues that benefit our community so that we can go and advocate for what we want instead of always playing defense, instead of always reacting and responding. We need to be setting our own agenda. We need to be saying this is what we want for our communities, and I think that's going to make us more effective. But and we should be doing that with this upcoming special session. So there's going to be a special session on crime, and I'm using the air quotes intentionally because it's like, okay, what kind of crime are we talking about, right? I think this is going to be focused.
They're not talking about that RTA had to close down the transportation because a bunch of folks were uptown were
violating certain city ordinances.
Yeah, no, not that crime.
I don't think so. But we also know that there are different levels of crime. There are different things that lead to crime. I've always been focused on trying to truly prevent crime, not respond to crime. And we need to be having honest conversations and coming up with honest solutions to crime, which we know starts with education, economic opportunity, housing policies, healthcare policies, creating stable homes, stable situations for young people so that they have better choices, and ultimately we have better outcomes. And that's what I plan to bring to this session on crime, personally. If we're going to talk about crime, just reacting to it, which is what we've always done, not just in Louisiana, but in America.
Right.
We incarcerate the most people, but we're not any safer as a result. Yeah. So I'm concerned about this crime session because there will be an intentional effort to revert back to the ways of the past when we were trying to be smarter about how we dealt with the issue of crime in this state. And we know, just looking at the data, when you talk about juvenile detention or when you just talk about adult incarceration, it's communities of color, particularly the black community, that's hit the hardest. I said earlier that black people make up 1/3 of the state. We make up 2/3 of the prison population in adult prison. We make up almost 80% of the juvenile population, if not more. So we need to be very concerned, and we need to be at the table bringing those personal stories and testimonies to come up with better solutions. And I don't fault anybody, whether they're of the opposite party or the new governor or anyone, for wanting to come up with solutions to make our community safer. We all want that. We live right here in the city.
It's the how, huh?
It's the how. It's all about the how. Yeah.
How should people get involved? Like when you say we should be organizing, like what does that look like? How, so people need really the marching orders,
Yeah, I've always been a believer in that if everybody does a little, we can all do it. We can all do a lot. Everybody shouldn't feel like they have to do everything.
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't have to run for political office.
Yeah.
Everybody doesn't have to start a nonprofit. Everybody can do a little bit of a little, right? I think it's just starting by voting, right?
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that's just your civic duty. People fought and died for that right, and I think we start there. We have to know who our elected leaders are.
I would just say that's the rent you pay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, it's service is the rent you pay for your time here, and to whom much is given, much is required. So you want freedom? Freedom ain't free. You have to be in the game. You have to show up. So voting, like kind of basic, right? Basic stuff, knowing who your elected leaders are, following the issues, seeing what's happening at your local school board, knowing who your state reps, your state senators, your city council people are, and just engaging with them and making sure they know who you are. And I think just those little things of just being conscious and aware of what's going on can help change the trajectory. But there are so many ways to get information now. The legislative website, the city council website. If you just go online and just seek what committees are being scheduled, what bills are being filed, there's so many ways to find out what's happening. And I say pursue what interests you.
Yeah.
If you care about young kids and education, let's see what's going on with young kids and education in the community. Show up to a school board meeting if you have the time, or if not, follow the meeting if it's been streamed online later at some other time. If you care about chemical plants in your community and whether or not they're spewing things that could be harmful.
Right.
There are groups that are organized around these issues. Reach out to them, join them, contribute to them. Help good candidates who are running, who you believe in, who can share your interests. There's so many different ways for people to get involved. So I don't necessarily believe in telling someone to do something that they're not comfortable with, but I say do something. Find a way to be involved. And if everybody does a little bit, we can all do a lot.
Yeah, we're going to have a couple organizations on this bonus episode, including LCCR, ACLU, Louisiana, ISLA, and so that'll hopefully help folks, kind of figure out how to tap in and how to, think about getting involved in the community. Well, it's Mardi Gras season. Happy Mardi Gras.
Happy Mardi Gras.
What's your favorite thing about Mardi Gras?
I think it might change as I've evolved. I have a 5-year-old now, so my Mardi Gras experience has shifted.
It's about holding up.
And not trying to strain my shoulder. Last year, she just became addicted to getting on my shoulders, and it was a great experience. So that's what excites me now about Mardi Gras. And I rode one time, and I think that was a good enough experience for me, but I like just being in the crowd with the people, just on regular block or corner, just soaking it in, taking it in.
I've been seeing you on Jackson Street.
Uptown. So I'll be on Jackson and Oretha on Tuesday, early morning, and then we go over to Orleans and Miro for the afternoon. So we usually catch Zulu twice. That's how I like to do it. That's been our routine for the past few years. But leading up to that, we kind of stick and move on certain parades. I try not to overdo it leading up to Tuesday, and I make
it's a lot.
It's a lot. I make it out.
Pace yourself.
I make it out there for Lundi Gras. But I love Mardi Gras because it's just a great reminder of how special this place is.
Yes.
And Mardi Gras, I have always found, especially when we have good weather, but even when we don't, it's a rejuvenator for the city. And it's a spirit lift for the city. And we don't even have to say it, we just feel it.
Yeah.
So no matter how difficult the times are that we're going through in New Orleans, this is our special moment for us to come together. It's almost spiritual. And we celebrate, and it lifts the spirits, even if it's
because you got to know that the people ain't really working right now.
We're not working. We're a little checked out.
Right. You guys know.
I'm gonna get back to you.
I'm gonna get back to you.
I'm gonna get back to you after the Mardi Gras. Maybe on Thursday. Maybe the Monday after. I don't know.
I expect the Monday after.
You know, so that's a special thing, and I mean, where do you find anything else like that?
Nowhere else.
Yeah. So I just like to marvel at it, quite honestly. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We are grateful for your time.
I'm honored.
Thank you for listening to this bonus episode of Black and Brown Get Down podcast. Please make sure that in the description you check out, find, go follow all the things, everyone who was on this episode, so that you can also stay in tune with all the information that we talked about today.